For this morning's Bible class. This will be our last class of the quarter, and so if you've been enjoying the classes, I'm sorry. If you haven't been enjoying the classes, you're welcome. This is it. But today we're going to be looking at David's responses. We're focusing on David's responses in the Psalms, and I'm pretty sure I'm only going to get to one Psalm today. But we're looking at that. So let's go ahead and, this is the last class, sorry. So I want to talk about my goal for today. So we're going to look at Psalm 3. And in Psalm 3, kind of like what Zach mentioned last week, that even in our manuscripts and the Masoretic text, even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we have these subscriptions that describe what some of the Psalms are about or when they were written. And in this case, in Psalms 3, the psalm was written during while David was fleeing from his son Absalom. So we're going to take a little bit of time to remind ourselves about some of the things of Absalom's story, but that'll be just one slide and quick. And then I want to consider the actions of the story and how the story that we read in 2 Samuel, how it kind of shows itself through the psalm. I think there's a lot of really interesting connections that we can make. And then, of course, we'll look at how it applies to us. But we'll look at the application each time, not once at the end of class. So a couple places here in Acts 13:22, we'll read. There's also a similar description of David that we get in 1 Samuel 13, chapter 14. But we're going to look at the one in Acts. And when when he had removed him, he raised up David to be their king, of whom he testified and said, "I have found in David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will." So we remember that David is a man after God's own heart, but then we also spent quite a bit of time in this class looking at some of the shortcomings and sin that David had, that he was guilty of. And I think it's one thing that is a good reason why it's important for us to look at David's responses like we are last week and this week, is because David is in the response hall of fame as far as the kings of Israel. He has shortcomings. He's a man, so he's guilty of sins all the time. But whenever we look at other kings, when they're guilty of sin, and especially when they're confronted about it, what do? They dig their heels in and they get defensive and they want to stick to their ways and keep doing what they think feels good. Well, David is the opposite. He's confronted about shortcomings that he has, and his responses are probably where we can learn some of the most from him. So we will. So Absalom's story. So a few things that I want us to remember. So Absalom was David's third son. He was his third son. However, we never hear mention of his second son other than his birth mention. So probably he was the second in line for the crown prince after Amnon. Well, he kills Amnon, the one that was above him, the older son. He kills him after 2 years because after he assaulted his full sister, his being Absalom's full sister. He then flees to his maternal grandfather's, the king who was the king of Geshur, and he resides there for 3 years. He then returns to Jerusalem, but David still won't see him for 2 more years because he's angry. He then burns Joab's field to manipulate his way and to get an audience with his father, the king, and they kind of have a reunion moment, and Absalom is all of a sudden welcome again around the palace and in the king's presence. He then uses this time and this new permission to do some political maneuvering, and he gets the people on his side, and he's kind of building up the groundwork for his rebellion. He declares himself king in Hebron, the same Judite city where David was first declared king. He then gets David's counselor Ahithophel, who is also the grandfather of Bathsheba, and he returns and rules from Jerusalem shortly, or maybe even immediately, after David and his servants flee. And so Absalom's story, all but the battle there at the end. All right. Now I want to read Psalm 3. This will be the psalm that we focus on today. We're going to read the entire psalm. It is broken up on 2 different slides, so I'll change slides for you here if you're not following along in your own Bible. And I will be reading from the English Standard Version. Save me, O my God, a psalm of David when he fled from Absalom, his son. O Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. Salah. But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the lifter of my head. I cried aloud to the Lord, and he answered me from his holy hill. Salah. I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me. I will not be afraid of many thousands of people who have set themselves against me all around. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. For you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessings be on your people. Selah. So a great psalm of David. I should have mentioned this at the beginning, but I want to take a few minutes to allow everybody just to think about. I've had lots of time to think about what it means, but I want to allow you guys to think about its meaning just for like 30 seconds. So we're going to go back, and we're not going to catch every single line, but I want to go back through a few individual lines, and I want to make connection from the story that we read about in 2 Samuel and Absalom's rebellion, and then look at how David is responding to it in this psalm. So the first, I want to look at the verse 1. Oh my Lord, how many are my foes? Many are rising against me. And this is very true. Remember from our story, we'll look in 2 Samuel chapter 15 here at 2 different verses. In 2 Samuel 12 and 15:12, the second half, he says, and the conspiracy grew strong, and the people with Absalom kept increasing. So Absalom is winning over the people, and his conspiracy or his rebellion, people are joining forces with him. And if you remember from our class on Absalom's rebellion, David and his men are greatly outnumbered because Absalom is the king of the entire nation of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba. David has his mighty men, and that's it, and their families, I guess. And so the conspiracy was growing strong. Many are my foes, and absolutely this is true. David is surrounded by people that used to serve him, by the nation of Israel. And then also in verse 13, and a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel have gone after Absalom. So again, this is right before David chooses to flee Jerusalem, and he's warned that Absalom has won the hearts of his nation. Remember that we too are going to find ourselves isolated. Sometimes it'll feel like God is always on our side. He's never going to leave us. But whenever we're going around this world, oftentimes we're going to feel like we are surrounded by enemies. And I want to remember a couple of things that we have been called to do in order to have strength. In Philippians chapter 1 and verse 28, Paul tells us, and not frightened in anything by your opponents. This is a clear sign to them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. That even when we feel like we are surrounded and it's hopeless because people are being evil to us or mean to us, we should always be able to remember that it is a sign of who they are and it is a sign of who we are. The world is not a friend of God. Also in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 28, it says, and do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. I always feel like it's hard for me to remember that the things that aren't right in front of me and hitting me in the face are not the only things that I should be concerned with. Here, Jesus is reminding us that even though we have the people here, physical on this earth, that are doing immediate harm to us, they're not the ones that we should be afraid of. The ones that we should fear is God, who is in heaven. Let's move on to verse 2. Many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God, Selah. So think about this, right? So David is king of Israel. He is the second king of the united kingdom of Israel. Saul was the first. After Saul's death, the kingdom is fractured for 7.5 years while David rules over Judah only. And the rest of the tribes, for 2 of those years, have one of Saul's sons as kings. And for 5.5 of those years, we're not sure who is their leader. Maybe, we're not sure. So it's fun to speculate. But I won't. And then David becomes the king over the united nation of Israel. David is doing great things. Remember when we looked at all of the military victories that David has, they are knowing victory through David like the Israelites, have never known before. And he is their beloved king for a lot of his kingship. But during this time, they are rebelling against him. And it is not just his son, even though that certainly would have hurt. These are his own people, his nation. Remember how greatly outnumbered he is. His nation is rebelling against him, choosing to side with Absalom. And here where it says that many are saying of my soul, there is no salvation for him in God. I want to look at our story in 2 Samuel. So I know Psalm said many are saying of me, and I'm only going to look at one example of someone saying it to him. This is just an example of that being true. But remember, as David is fleeing Jerusalem, when he's going through the nation of the cities of Benjamin, Shimei, the Benjamite of the household of Saul, comes out and starts shouting curses at him. And remember, Abishai, David's mighty man, wants to go and behead him and says, let me just go cut his head off. Who does he think he is? And David restrains him. This is the example I want to look at. In 2 Samuel chapter 16, as David is fleeing Jerusalem, verses 7 and 8. And Shimei said as he cursed, Get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. The Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, your evil is on you, for you are a man of blood. And so realities are sometimes based on perspective. And we read the story, and sometimes we read the story from the sole perspective of David as the hero. And that's what he was. He was God's chosen king. But consider the perspective of this man, Shimei, for a moment. And even though it wasn't true, you know, if you're told a lie 10 times, you'll probably believe it more than the truth told to you once. And so the Shimei, this man who descended from Saul, a Benjamite, he never believed that David should be king. He says that you were reigning in Saul's place. Saul was in his house was supposed to be king. He calls David a worthless man and a man of blood. He says that I don't feel sorry for you. You brought this on yourself. This isn't being done to you. You did it to yourself because of how you lived your life. Calls David a worthless man. And maybe David, again, as he tells Abishai just to let him shout curses, because maybe God will appreciate David enduring the suffering of this cursing man and allow the kingdom to be returned to him. So who knows how long he had to listen to it? But maybe David is tempted to start believing that everybody believes this, not just this Shimei who's shouting the curses at him. And David goes to God and he says, in his Psalms, that many are saying of me that there's no salvation for him in God. Well, remember, for us too, let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 3 and 4. Here, Paul's writing to the church in Corinth, and he says, "But with me, it is a very small thing that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I do not even judge myself, for I am not aware of anything against myself, but I am not thereby acquitted. It is the Lord who judges me." And so we might hear people around us shouting bad things, or maybe even just thinking bad things about us, but let's remember that other people's opinions of ourselves, not even our opinion of ourselves, is what counts. What counts is what God thinks of us. We'll also look in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 16. "Having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ might be put to shame." When you are slandered, not if you are slandered, right? But when you are spoken evil against, you ought to be living in a way that the people that say those bad things about you are going to be put to shame themselves. Not that it won't be uncomfortable to hear in the moment, but don't focus on what other people think about you. Focus on what God's word shows that He thinks about you. So in verse 3, we're not gonna look a lot at verse 3 because I think it pertains to verses 1 and 2 that we've already looked at. But let's consider "But you, O Lord, are a shield about me, my glory, and the lifter of my head." Sounds like a song we sing from time to time, and I'm not a singer, so I won't lead it for you. But just consider how in verse 1 he's talking about how his enemies surround him. In verse 2 he's talking about how people are saying bad things about him. But here David, in David's response in this psalm, he comes back and he says, "But you, Lord, are the protection that I need. You, Lord, are the one that is going to keep my head up." And so pertains to the other two. Next, I want to look at verse 5. It says, "I lay down and slept. I woke again, for the Lord sustained me." I think this is my favorite connection. It's easy to miss, especially because Psalm 3 and 2 Samuel are so far apart in the Bible, but I think this is really interesting. So remember Ahithophel. So Ahithophel is David's counselor. And remember the high praise and opinion that David and his men and even Absalom had for Ahithophel. And they said, "Oh, the counsel of Ahithophel is as if one was speaking to the oracle of God or directly to an angel of God." And so Ahithophel has this high esteem as if he is one that is wise. And he's always going to give good counsel that brings about the result that he wants. And remember the advice. So Ahithophel is the grandfather of Bathsheba. Perhaps that is partially why he joins the rebellion against David. because he knows the sin that David did to his granddaughter and to his grandson-in-law. And then I want to spend a little bit of time reminding ourselves of the advice that Ahithophel gives to Absalom that Absalom doesn't take. In 2 Samuel 17, the first two verses, this is when Ahithophel is talking to Absalom. Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Let me choose 12,000 men, and I will arise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and discouraged and throw him into a panic. And all the people who are with him will flee. I will strike down only the king." And he goes on to say that he's going to bring the rest of the people back. So Ahithophel wants to take these 12,000 soldiers, very possibly the 12,000 standing guard of Jerusalem that we read about in 2 Chronicles chapter 1. And so this standing army in Jerusalem that is only a guard of Jerusalem that is always ready to go. So Ahithophel says, look here is 12,000 men just chomping their teeth to come with me. Let me take these 12,000 men and go and attack David. You know what? Remember, I gave examples and reasons why David is a lot closer to the end of his life now than the beginning of his life. Maybe we consider that old, maybe we don't. He's close to 70. And so maybe he's weary. He's fleeing Jerusalem. Later, here in a minute, we're going to read how he's barefoot. So he's not even well equipped to flee Jerusalem. So he's tired. Let me go attack him while he's tired, and let me kill him. And remember David's friend Hushai, who David sends back to be a double agent, and Hushai counters Ahithophel's advice in this case and says, no, wait, let the entire army, not just 12,000 men, let everyone from Dan to Beersheba be gathered to you, Absalom, and then we'll attack when we have everybody, the numbers on our side. And Absalom ends up taking that advice. But I imagine what David must have heard about this from Hushai, maybe from somebody else, that Ahithophel, the person that you claim speaks as if someone is talking to God's angel, Ahithophel said he wanted to come kill you that first night you left. And here David says that he lied down and he slept. Why? Because he was tired. Just like Ahithophel said, I'm going to attack him when he's weary. And David says, I lay down and I slept. And I woke up again because God sustained me. And that it's a powerful reminder that David realizes that, you know what, I'm not invincible. And I have these mighty men of war who are around me, but as we read in our class on the mighty men, many of them died. They're not invincible either. And so David realizes here that he's not able to escape by his own power, but he gives the credit to God. He realizes that he laid down and he slept when he was weary, and he woke up because God did it for him. Let's look at Matthew chapter 6. So this is during Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. In verses 25 through 27, he says, Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, nor about your body, what you will put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his lifespan? The planning that we do, the worrying that we do in our life, sometimes we think that man, good thing I was worried about that because it didn't come to pass, right? But we need to remember that our worrying does little good. That it is God that is going to sustain us. It is not what we choose to set our minds on. Let's also look in Acts chapter 17. For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. So this is during Paul's Sermon on the Mount in Acts chapter 17, and he's talking to these Greeks in Athens, and he's trying to remind them of the unknown God that they build this altar to. And he says, you guys know about this God that I'm preaching about, and it is in him that we do everything. In him we live, in him we breathe, in him we move. Our being resides in God. And so God sustains not just our spiritual life, but God sustains every aspect of our life. But we know many of our loved ones and friends have died. We know that our physical life is not always sustained. Our physical bodies are not the immoral parts of ourselves. And so I want to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 4, 16 and 17 when Paul is writing here. So we do not lose heart. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. So even if we find ourselves hurting and in difficult times, and we're praying to God, and even if God doesn't sustain us physically in that moment, he is always sustaining us spiritually. Even when our bodies fail and things hurt and times are bad, our spiritual reality never changes. God always keeps us if we remain faithful to him. Look at verse 7, Psalm 3 now. Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. I want to remind us in our story in 2 Samuel 18, verses 7 and 8. So this is during the battle with Absalom. Remember, all of the army has been gathered to Absalom from Dan to Beersheba. He has the army of Israel. He is attacking David and his men who have already crossed the Jordan, and he is now in the forest of Ephraim is where this battle is taking place, the wooded country of the tribe of Ephraim. And the men, in 2 Samuel chapter 18, 7 and 8, and the men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David. Man, it's weird. Men of Israel being against David. One of the only places that we read it. And the men of Israel were defeated there by the servants of David. And the loss there was great on that day, 20,000 men. The battle spread over the face of all the country, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword. Arise, O Lord, save me. O my God, for you strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked. There's other times in David's kingship where God actively fights for him. Remember the second time that he attacks the Philistines after he's king of the United Nation, right after he establishes Jerusalem as his new capital. And the second time God says, don't attack him yet. Wait till you hear the sound of a marching army in the trees. God is going to go attack them first. And so there's other times. This isn't the only time. But here, notice what it says. That the forest devours more than the sword. David has his mighty men of war, his army with him. And they're outnumbered, but they're the mighty men. And even then, God says, no, I'm going to take care of a lot of this for you. And more die by the forest than by the sword. So us today. Let's look at 2 Timothy chapter 4, 16 through 18. Paul here writing to Timothy. At my first offense, no one came to stand by me, but all deserted me. May it not be charged against them. But the Lord stood by me and strengthened me, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth. So Paul, in this section of the letter, Paul is asking Timothy to come to him quickly. Don't delay. Come quickly. Paul wants Timothy's companionship. And here, specifically, he is warning Timothy about Alexander the coppersmith. And Alexander the coppersmith did great harm to Paul. And here Paul is describing how he brought him in front of the court. And when Alexander did this, and the people that were with Paul were afraid and deserted him and left him isolated and alone. And Paul says, I hope it's not counted against him. I hope that's a sin God doesn't hold over the people that fled. But he's warning Timothy to not pay attention and get caught up by this coppersmith, Alexander. And notice there that last line that Paul says, everybody was away from me, but I was rescued from the lion's mouth. I was saved by God, even though I was alone. Oh, sorry. I stopped reading. I was supposed to click forward. All right, 16 through 18. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. Same things apply. I don't think I need to re-explain it. All right, last verse, last thing we're going to look at in Psalm 3. David says, salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessing be on your people. Salah. So in the story, a couple of places I want to remember that we can look at. So first, 2 Samuel 15 and verse 14. Then David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, or else there will be no escape for us from Absalom. Go quickly, lest he overtake us. Quickly, and bring down ruin on us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword. So, this is the next verse. Remember earlier, we just looked at verse 13, when a messenger came to David and said, the men of Israel's hearts have gone after Absalom. Well, this is the next verse. David rises up and he tells his servants that, hey, we need to get out of here, because Absalom can probably beat us. There's not going to be any escape. But notice the last part. He's not only concerned with himself, he's also concerned with the city of Jerusalem. That last section there where he says, ruin on us and strike the city with the edge of the sword. So he's wanting to get out of Jerusalem. He probably knows that he's going to have a battle, but he doesn't want the battle to have the collateral damage spill over into his beloved city, Jerusalem. So he wants to get out. Also, later in that chapter, this is while he and his servants are fleeing, Abiathar and Zadok the priest come, and they're coming to David, and they have Levites behind them carrying the Ark of the Covenant of God, wanting to bring it along with David to wherever he is going. Then the king said to Zadok, carry the ark back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, he will bring me back and let me see both it and his dwelling place. But if he says, I have no pleasure in you, behold, here I am. Let him do to me what seems good to him. So here David expresses his concern for God's people, in that he is not just concerned with himself and that he wants the ark of God to come with him, but he tells the priest to bring the ark back. And he wants the people in Jerusalem to have the ark. He recognizes that, you know what? I have a body that is going to fail. I'm not going to be here forever. But you know what comes after me are still, God's people are still going to be here, and they're going to need the ark of God. And so whether, I can't tell the future. Maybe God's not going to let me survive this battle, but the ark needs to stay here in Jerusalem. So David sends them back. A couple verses later, now we're in verse 30. But David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went, barefoot, and with his head covered, and all the people who were with him covered their heads, and they went up weeping as they went. So David here is leaving Jerusalem, and he is going up the Mount of Olives as he exits Jerusalem, and he is crying. He has, he's barefoot, and he's weeping, and he's covering his head, and everybody else is doing the same thing. It is a very worth pausing over connection. I think it is interesting that there's just a few times in the New Testament where we're told that Jesus wept or shed tears. One of them is in the opposite. So David's leaving Jerusalem, going up the Mount of Olives. In Luke chapter 19, verses 41 and 42, Jesus is entering Jerusalem, coming down the Mount of Olives. And this is right before the triumphal entry. And when he, that is Jesus, and when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. And so Jesus is weeping as he comes down the Mount of Olives to go into the city of Jerusalem. And here he seems to be foretelling about the coming destruction in AD 70 when the Romans destroy the temple, and he is weeping over Jerusalem, not realizing the opportunity for peace that they had. So just a reminder where we're at. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Your blessings be on your people. Let's look at Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. So Paul here reminds us that we're not to only be concerned about our own well-being and our own desires. We ought to be holding other people up, putting them on a pedestal, and not focusing on our own interests as more important, but let's focus on other people's interests as more important. One of my favorite places to reflect this is in 1 Corinthians 8, 11 through 13. So Paul here again writing to the church at Corinth, and this is right toward the end of his admonition for them that eating meat sacrificed to idols is fine because it means nothing unless this. And so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed, the brother for whom Christ died. Thus, sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. It's humbling for us to remember that Christ died for me, that my sins required Christ's death on the cross. And that's true, but it's also true that Christ died for every single person around me. And it doesn't matter if I am here or if I am just out in the world. Christ died for everybody. And I ought to remember that if I am going to make somebody's faith harder, that I am potentially wounding someone that Christ died for. And so again, just as we read about in Philippians, we ought to consider other people to be even more significant than ourselves. I remember shortly after my brain injury, I had a job at a middle school up in Alaska, and I was the discipline advisor. And basically all that would happen was kids that would get in trouble would get kicked out of class. They'd get sent to me for the rest of class. And then I'd make them call their parents, and then I'd teach them science or whatever they got kicked out of until class got over. And I really liked that job for a lot of reasons. I hated it for other reasons. But I would fairly often get the complaint that, my kid's not getting an education if he's getting kicked out of school. And my response was always, well, your kid is roughly 1/29th as important as the other 29 kids in that class. And so if he's disrupting their education, then he's the problem. So that's why he's getting kicked out. And it's the same thing here, that same philosophy that we can see, that my desire to eat meat because maybe it's cheap if it's sacrificed to idols and I want to save a few pennies, that desire means almost nothing when I compare it to the damage that it might do to my fellow brother or sister who sees me doing something like that. So things that are not sin in and of themselves can be sin if we go about them the wrong way. And it's always important for us to remember that we need to not hold to what we're allowed to do, but instead we should be holding to whatever builds the kingdom of God up the best. I really thought I'd have time for comments. I'm very sorry that I don't. Thank you guys for sticking with me, and thank you for your attention this quarter.